Welcome to Governance Now. This is Gitanjali Minhas and you're watching Checks and Balances. With the Narendra Modi government's push on infrastructure and keeping it in top gear, developments are taking place at an accelerated pace. In today's episode, we will talk about hard infrastructure, which is transportation, and discuss issues relating to roads, railways, and logistics. From 1.7% in 2014, India's capital expenditure as part of the GDP increased to 2.9% in the year 2022-2023. In the budget for the year 2023-2024, the Government of India has allocated rupees 10 lakh crore, which is 3.3% of the GDP, to infrastructure. The Ministry of Railways has received its highest ever allocation of rupees 2.4 lakh crore, while the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has received an allocation of 2.7 lakh crore. For every rupee spent on infrastructure, the GDP growth is 2 to 2.5 times per annum for 3 to 4 years. The construction sector contributes to about 10% of the GDP and logistics about 5% to the GDP. Together, they contribute about 15% to the GDP, which is quite a substantial proportion. Additionally, for smooth implementation of infrastructure projects across various ministries, the government has set up PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan on a GIS platform. National Infrastructure Pipeline is monitoring projects with a capital outlay of rupees 111 lakh crore between 2020 and 2025, out of which 50% allocation has gone to roads and railways. The national logistics policy can potentially reform our logistics sector. Currently, logistics cost as percentage of a GDP is about 14% as against 8% in US and European Union. For ease of doing business, National Single Window System has been opened with different regulatory agencies on board. It is partially operational and expected to be fully commissioned soon. While the government has brought in framework, there are several key concerns that need to be addressed. Now, what are these key concerns and how can they be addressed? For this, we spoke to infrastructure experts. P.R.K. Murthy, former Director Projects, MMRDA, said,
infrastructure is realized as the boon to the growth of this country. The earlier 60 years, whatever you call this, we have been doing only the revenue expenditures most of the time. The capital infrastructure was not kept to pace with the required needs. We were always doing the firefighting and crisis management.
Former Director IIM Bangalore, Professor Raghuram, told us,
we have been getting more funds thanks to better tax collections, tax penetration, GST. Also, even when the crude oil rates went down, the surplus the government mopped up by not reducing the fuel rates. All this has allowed the government to invest more in infrastructure. The word infrastructure it's a structure from below. Anybody doing further economic activity should be able to take these for granted, and we are still far from that situation.
Arindam Guha, former partner Deloitte, Government and Public Services, said,
three definite impacts of infrastructure investments. Direct impact in terms of the construction sector, generating employment and creating value. Second is supporting a vibrant logistics sector. And the third is attracting manufacturing and services, which are the backbone of our economy. Unless you invest in roads, railways, airports, etc., you don't attract investments in manufacturing as well. Because every manufacturer today is looking at logistics cost as a very, very critical ingredient of his overall cost structure. And we know for a fact that India needs to improve on that front. The only way you can reduce these logistics costs is to upgrade your infrastructure. In addition to all these three opportunities, which are actually creating jobs, infrastructure also has a direct impact on inflation, because when you look at goods, eatables, let's say, unless you have state-of-art infrastructure and reduced logistics cost, all of it adds to the prices which we see in the market for food items.
Today, private investment is hardly 15 to 17% of the total infrastructure investment. How can we enhance it? What needs to be done?
There is going to be massive requirement of private participation required, because this, whatever the 1.5 trillion is not going to be sufficient in infrastructure. The government alone won't be able to do that. Presently, it's around 85% is going from the government, and around hardly 10 to 15% is coming from the private investment.
The model of public-private partnerships for a substantial part of the infrastructure, I think, is the way to go. There may be certain conditions under which government may still need to continue to be the primary infrastructure developer.
The road sector, I would say, is significantly ahead when it comes to attracting private investment. A notable addition has been the Infrastructure Investment Trust, which was floated by NHAI 2 years back, and now they have gone ahead with bringing in additional tranches. As far as the railways investment is concerned, it's been primarily the government which has been in the driver's seat. Attempts were made to attract private investment in passenger trains, in station redevelopment, etc. I think percentage of proportion of success has been quite limited. And I think that's a challenge which needs to be addressed.
We still have issues of land acquisition, environmental clearances, the trade-off between development and sustainability. I mean, all these need to be addressed with people at the highest levels taking initiative, being attentive to it, ensuring that projects get completed on time.
The basic challenge is skilled labor. On one side, we are talking about the unemployment and all those things. What we had suggested last time is these ITIs. I think the government is now looking at these industrial training institutes, and there is also, you have the National Construction Academy. These have to be strengthened, and the government have to infuse training, pre-training program before the labor is infused onto the construction sites.
While the railway safety budget has been enhanced considerably, it is a question of human error and higher accountability of different ministries.
Safety culture in India is less than desirable. We need continuous reinforcement, continuous training, better and better systems. For example, the accident in Odisha, part of it is also a systems failure where, they had moved on to a manual override mode. But then the manual overrides need to go through processes that have appropriate checks and balances. Without people really having applied themselves to detail, you could end up having something serious.
In terms of, achieving that perfect level of monitoring and accountability, that has to do with the organization structure, the supervision mechanisms. There's a soft element to that. In addition to the signaling systems, which are the hard infrastructure, which are a critical part of it. Continuous focus on governance, administrative and HR related issues.
Safety induction program has to be monitored very systematically and very judicially. They have to undergo safety means they have to undergo the safety program. There is a lack of shortage of engineers who are working, both from consultants who are monitoring and as well as the contractors and the departments. So all the three, this comes under the capacity building. So the institutional building and capacity building for both governments, contractors and consultants need to be in place.
Speaking on road safety, state jurisdiction is a prominent factor, and there is a question of institutional capabilities in few states.
we need a lot of attention on road design beyond technology. Many simple things we do not have. For example, in any highway, if you need to make a right turn, it's important to have a buffer lane so that vehicles who have to take a right turn can move into that buffer lane and wait for the oncoming vehicles before they make the turn. But most places we don't have that. Licensing, which is a regulatory function. We are still in a culture where maybe people can buy off licenses, and whether they know driving or they are tested sufficiently driving. Do we have periodic eye checkups, color blindness checkup? Safety needs a lot of attention.
If you see, more than 1.5% GDP is lost in road accidents every year. It's not a good sign. Nearly more than 60,000 people die in railway accidents. So both railways and roadways, we need to have the safety in place. That's my submission. And the revenues have to, at least, I won't say that, these projects have to recover the costs. These are the capital intensive projects. But at least the operations and maintenance costs have to be, set off through whatever resources, whatever revenues that they collect.
I'm one for bringing in public-private partnerships, not just for the financing, but just for the managerial attention that the private parties can bring in to infrastructure development.
How can disputes between parties get addressed so that project completion is not affected?
The lack of confidence by both the parties. You have the disputes there, then the minimum traffic guarantees. Most of them are in the revenues and the losses what they are making. The contractors, because of their financial condition or whatever the reasons, their disputes are not being addressed in time, or some of these companies go under NCLT or they become financially, unsound. Many of these times, these things have delayed projects abnormally. My submission would be that there has to be a dispute independent regulator who will look at these as a whole, in a holistic manner, and dispute resolution mechanism has to be faster. The national highways in the last 5 years, they have put the massive claims of around 88,000 crores.
There's a need for an impartial arm's length regulator. You can't really expect the government to operate trains and also regulate the sector, because then the private sector won't have that confidence in a standalone regulator. There's also an additional question of sharing of common infrastructure. So if you look at private passenger trains, for example, there they would have run on the same tracks as the trains operated by the government. So there's a question of shared infrastructure over there, right? And naturally, if you don't have a standalone regulator, there are all sorts of apprehensions which are there in the minds of the private investor. There are also some of the institutional issues which are there. I think there's significant opportunity in attracting private investment in freight corridors. But what I do understand is that there are some underlying issues in the form of the land ownership on which the freight corridors have been constructed, because the land is owned by the railways, whereas the freight corridors have been constructed by Dedicated Freight Corridor Corporation of India. And those are the typical legal and transactional issues which need to be addressed if one were to attract private investment. There's the issue of financial sustainability, tariff or tolls. Because no infrastructure asset can be maintained properly if the cash flows arising from that asset are inadequate. I think all of us have realized that now. There also the regulator has to play a critical role in tariff adjudication. But we need one policy for the sector. And that's where the regulator for the sector needs to come in.
On addressing the challenge of last mile connectivity, here is what our experts said.
What I had seen in my service, I had received a phone call from Joint Secretary PMO. When the metro network has started, we started, implementing this 2014. Joint Secretary of the PMO called me to ask, do you have any issue with any of the departments? Please let me know, any central government department or state government department, and we will be directly interacting with them to resolve your issues so that your project is not delayed. This is under the Pragati program. So every program where the Honorable Prime Minister lays the foundation stone, it has been kept on the monitoring system under the Pragati program. In fact, we have submitted a paper to Maharashtra government at that time. Every district headquarters, including Chandrapur, Gadchiroli, should be connected by high-speed rail and high-speed road connectivity.
It's fairly well established that as much as 40% of the total supply chain costs are accounted for by the last mile. The government of India has already introduced a special scheme for incentivizing state governments for capital investments. So, that's a very good offering because it enables the state governments to overcome their financial constraints.
Iterating enhanced long-term capex on infra projects, Arindam said,
if you look at the means of financing in our country, it's largely bank finance, which is not of that high duration. Pension funds, insurance companies have hardly 5% investment, if not lower, in infrastructure investments. So there is opportunity for a regulatory change there to bring in more long-term investments.
Land acquisition and rehabilitation of project-affected persons is another roadblock due to which infrastructure projects get delayed and sometimes indefinitely.
The government has the right to acquire land for public purpose, which includes infrastructure, without any delays. Only compensation can be contested. But what happens is political forces who speak on behalf of the people who are giving up the land still manage to go to courts giving a reason. And I think in all fairness and principles of natural justice, courts want to hear them out. It is a difficult process.
Land again is a state subject. It's under the jurisdiction of the state government. There needs to be a proper, transparent land acquisition policy because the landowner has to get his fair share or fair price for that land. There also needs to be an alternate mechanism for providing him land in a place where he can relocate if at all.
The Delhi-Mumbai expressway, where they are passing through the animal sanctuaries, they have actually now tunneled down so that the surface is left free for the animals. So, we've decided to invest more.
Suppose you have the 100 kilometers, let's say national highway to be done or, the major expressway to be done. So would you like to delay this project? Suppose the land acquisition takes, let's say 2 years. Sometimes the disputes are different case. I am keeping it aside. So would you like to wait for 2 years or would you like to complete the most of the places where the right of way is available and then address these concerns within these 2 years so that normally the project's completion time is around 4 to 5 years?
I think the regulatory framework needs more attention. While we have created regulatory institutions to enable infrastructure development, but sometimes the regulations have been tight. What we need is really soft touch regulation or regulation more as a last resort, allowing market forces to first play out. People learn how to anticipate the different aspects, political, technological, regulatory, stakeholders in terms of land, compensation that needs to be given, what kind of discussions to have, how to negotiate. Some of the stumbling blocks will increase in intensity as you go through the project, and then the solutions may occur only when part of the project is visible. I think overall there is an awareness in the right direction.
On that positive note, thank you for watching Checks and Balances. See you on the other side.